Hi, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you here to Berghaus. Is it your first time here for many people? Yes. Yeah, fantastic. Well, I'm here a lot of the time. I've almost taken up residence because it's a great place for doing events like this. It's a very warm environment and it's an absolutely beautiful room, isn't it? So on behalf of Berghaus, I'd like to welcome you, but more importantly, on behalf of Animal Aid, I'd like to welcome you. I'm recently their patron. I'm very proud to be their patron, although I've known Animal Aid for an awful long time and the great work it does. In fact, part of my progression, I'm an actor, for those of you that don't know it. And, maybe it's better that you don't know it, but part of my progression towards, for want of a better word, animal advocacy happened as a direct result of a great friend of mine called Dr. Andre Menache, who used to work for Animal Aid and now heads up Antidote Europe, and I do a lot of work with him campaigning against anti-vivisection work. And through conversations that I had with him, he used to use a term that we have to encourage human beings to stop waging war on all species on this our wonderful planet. And at that time I hadn't kind of connected up all the dots as far as the world, because we are waging war on all creatures on our planet in one way or the other, either animals for entertainment, animals for clothes, animals for food. And so he really focused my mind, and it was around that time that he also advised me to watch a film called Earthlings, which I did. For those of you who've watched Earthlings, you'll know that it's the most horrible indictment of industrialized animal slaughter. And on the day that I watched it 10 years ago, my wife came into the room after I'd finished watching it, and I could hardly speak, and she thought I'd had a stroke. And I then explained to her how horrible this was. And what I was so ashamed about was the fact that I didn't know it already, because there I was, you know, in my early 60s, and I hadn't joined up that cruelty and that horror. And from that day, I said to my wife, I'm never going to eat meat again, and I never have. And I have progressed during the last decade to becoming a vegan, which I think is, apart from meeting my wife, was one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. I think it's the most incredible lifestyle. And so I admire hugely the fact that Animal Aid is a dedicated vegan charity, which I think is sensational. I also admire the fact that they have opted not to go for charitable status, because by being, as we know with so many charities, and I am a patron probably to about over 20 different charities that are charitable, recognized, and they all do different work and great work in other ways, but Animal Aid chose not to compromise their campaigning drive by being registered as a charity. I think it's a dreadful controlling factor that the government puts on charities by making them sign up to and they can't campaign properly. And it looks like great work is being done, and of course it is, but it's not as great as it could be if they didn't have to massage the problem rather than deal with it head on in the way that I think Animal Aid does. So I congratulate you all for that wonderful decision. Were you about to do a round of applause for Animal Aid there? Let's do that. Fantastic. That's superb. I'm not going to talk much longer. I'm going to introduce you in a second to Isobel Hutchinson, who is the CEO, is that right? Before I do that, just for one moment, and actually you can never get me off, I'm afraid I can't stay for the whole evening, because tomorrow I'm going to Romania. I'm doing an event in Bran Castle in Transylvania. That's Dracula's castle. I'm thinking of doing Fangs Ain't What They Used to Be. And, so I'm leaving very early in the morning, so I'm afraid I can't stay for the whole evening, but I just wanted to say what a great pleasure it is to be here this evening and to be with you all, and to congratulate you all for your commitment. As I said, this is a really a kind of thank you from Animal Aid for your support, and it's not directly a fundraising evening, but you will find that there is a little pack in which you will find a fundraising section. So if you feel inclined, please donate. And I applaud you all for being here. And Isobel Hutchinson.
Thank you so much, Peter, for those opening words, for such kind words about Animal Aid, and of course for being a wonderful supporter of Animal Aid. We're absolutely delighted to have you as a patron, and of course beyond what you do for Animal Aid, we're so grateful for everything that you do for animals, so thank you. So the next thank you is to all of you here tonight for coming. We're really grateful to you for coming and to an indoor event on such a lovely warm evening as well. It's wonderful to see so many of you here. And you've all been invited here today because you care so much about animals and you do so much to support Animal Aid's work. So I'm sure with that in mind, a lot of you already know very well what we do at Animal Aid, but I'm just going to say a few words, just to introduce the organisation a little bit before I hand over to our guest speaker tonight, Rich Hardy. So Animal Aid's one of the UK's largest and longest established animal rights organisations. We were founded in 1977, so just over 40 years ago now. We campaign peacefully against all forms of animal cruelty, and really importantly, we promote cruelty-free living too. So we work on all sorts of different areas, from animals used in laboratories to those used in cruel sports, in farming and in slaughter. And one thing that's particularly critical for us at Animal Aid is speaking out for those animals who really have very little voice and very few people to speak out for them. So particularly those really sort of unpopular animals like squirrels, rats and mice, who may not have a great reputation but of course are just as sensitive and as capable of suffering as the sort of more popular animals who get a bit more public support. And a really key thing for us, of course, and the reason we exist, is to achieve really concrete results for animals and to make sure that we're having an impact and making changes for them. So you can see there just a few of our achievements from last year, including helping to stop a horrible new factory farm that would have kept around 144,000 chickens imprisoned inside it. And we also had great success with our new reindeer campaign, trying to stop reindeer, who are still of course semi-wild animals, from being used in entertainment events like in shopping centres and town centre parades. Says there on the banner we had 19 events cancelled as a result of our campaign, and that's actually gone up even more since the banner was printed, which is an excellent result. And we work in all sorts of different ways at Animal Aid. A really key thing is our political lobbying. We feel that that's so important to engage with policymakers to ensure that changes to the law happen. We work a lot with the media, trying to get our exposés about animal cruelty out to a really wide number of people and a really large audience. A really important element of our work too is our education programme for schools. We have a fantastic team of voluntary school speakers who give hundreds of school talks each year, taking that really important message of compassion to the next generation. But of course, a really crucial element to all of this, and that we're going to hear a lot more about tonight, is our undercover work, our undercover investigation. So that's going into farms, slaughterhouses and game bird establishments and actually exposing the realities of what goes on there. And of course, you may well have seen some of this sort of undercover work in exposés in the media or on social media, perhaps in our Outrage magazine. You will have seen those images from our investigations, and it's obviously really difficult to undertake that work and to get it out into the media, so it's only able to sort of surface periodically. But of course, for those animals, they're enduring that reality every single minute of every single day until they're slaughtered or meet another fate. So and each of those animals, of course, is an individual too who wants to live and who suffers, and we feel it's just so important to use undercover work to expose their plight really to the world and to let people know what's happening to them. And of course, that evidence is just so important for creating change. I'm sure many of you are aware of our successful campaign for mandatory CCTV in slaughterhouses, which has now succeeded in England. And that took around a decade of undercover investigations and also intensive political lobbying in order to secure that change. But without the undercover evidence, I don't think for a moment that that would have been possible, because it was so crucial to show the world that actually this concept of humane slaughter was a complete myth, and the realities of what was happening inside those slaughterhouses. Without that evidence, I don't think that that campaign would ever have succeeded. Our guest presenter, Rich Hardy, who I'm going to hand over to in a second, has been involved with undercover investigations on the front line of this incredible work for many years. He's worked with Animal Aid and also other groups, working in the UK, but also worldwide, and not just in those areas of animal exploitation and cruelty that we focus on, but also much more widely on other areas too. And now that Rich has actually retired from that line of work, he's able to speak freely about his experiences, which is incredible, and it's going to be an absolutely fascinating presentation.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Animal Aid, for inviting me here to speak to you all this evening. I've always been a big fan of Animal Aid. What I love about them is, firstly, their size, the people that are involved in the organisation, the supporters, and I feel like they're one of the organisations that have really led a sort of a trailblazing path for animal rights in the UK, and I would say some of their work is also percolated further afield than that as well. So I think you should all be very proud to be a supporter of this great organisation. They're smart, they come from the grassroots, and they're really effective, and I think this combination makes them stand out from a lot of organisations, and I'm pleased to have been able to help them a little bit in the past. So I've travelled up from Cornwall today, which is where I'm from, and my trips to the city seem to be getting more sporadic, but it's always nice to come to a venue like this, a great venue. Just to introduce you, I went vegan when I was about 13. I'm in my mid-40s now. And I started out on a very different path. I was about to sign a big contract with a professional football team. And they didn't like the fact I was vegan and into animals, and they thought I was a bit weaker than the other kids in the squad. And so I got dropped just before I was about to sign a big contract. So I was only 16 at that age. But at that moment, I realised that actually that wasn't a sort of career path that I wanted to do. And because it was my ethics and my interest in animals and the planet and veganism, I decided to follow my heart a little bit on that front instead. And I got into campaigning fairly quickly after that. And I actually recognised a few of you from about 20 years ago when I last saw you. Mulga, hello, nice to see you. I'd love to see you afterwards. I got involved as a campaigner, a farm animal campaigner, because farm animals was really the most pressing issue, I think, for me. Even as a young kid, I recognised that farm animals didn't have a voice. They really were marginalised in society, and I wanted to work on that particularly. So that's where I went from there, and I sort of was organising a lot of protests for compassionate world farming. It wasn't easy to work in animal rights in the early 90s, mid-90s, but I'm glad to say it's got a lot easier in the last few years. But yeah, that was a starting point for me. I wanted to start by doing something for farm animals, and that was the route I took. And it started like in a crazy way, really, because it was that time during the mid-90s when live animal exports all started, and that kind of brought the animal community together with just Middle England. And, you know, for once, animal issues were the focal point for the nation. It was a conversation point. You know, it was something we were talking about as the trucks rattled past people's sash windows in little ports and towns across the country and brought them out into the street to join hands with people like you to make a stand for farm animals. And of course, the trade has massively dropped over that period, and in no small part to the likes of you taking those actions at that time. But since then, I've gone on to do a few different things. I run a group called Surfers Against Sewage down in Cornwall, campaigning up the seas of the coast around Britain and Europe. And I also ran the Veganuary campaign in 2019, which was a wonderful experience too. It was so amazing to see what's happened in my relatively short lifetime. And I think what we can expect to see over the coming years will be, even more dramatic. But all the while, over that 20-year period, or the last 20 years of my campaigning, I've been going undercover for animals. And the reason I started doing it was a number of reasons. Firstly, because I was working on a campaign to improve the lives of hens, egg-laying hens in Europe. And thankfully that system, the Barron battery cage, did go. It was a landmark decision, but it didn't bring us the best solution in the enriched cage. But it was a start. We have to celebrate those moments when we make big breakthroughs for animals. And it was during that time that talking to politicians and trying to convince them, you need to pay more attention to the lives of animals, and in particular for me at that time, farm animals. And they were saying, show me the evidence, show me the evidence. And actually, in the mid-90s, there wasn't a great deal of evidence, and especially visual imagery. As a campaigner, I was really, really reliant on scientific journals. And, if you're going to a group of politicians in Westminster with a pile of papers like that, it's not going to get you a whole heap of traction. But if you go to them with some really powerful imagery, some really, striking footage, you can really start to move things forward a lot quicker. And I didn't think of it at that point that I was going to go into this work, but after a break at Compassion, I went surfing for a year, and just to sort of unwind a little bit from campaigning for animals, because as you know, it is quite a demanding, job mentally and physically. It takes up a lot of our time, and I needed a little bit of a break after the campaign. I was sort of surfing, and I was thinking to myself, well, what am I going to do next for animals? And it was this thing about, politicians saying, show me the evidence, because I'm not seeing it. And I thought, well, actually, I'm going to try and get some of this. And one day I was surfing off the east coast of New Zealand. As I went down to the beach, there was a big factory farm on top of the hill. And I was sitting on my board catching waves and enjoying everything that nature had to offer. Gannets diving into the water, splicing the ocean, and little fish jumping around everywhere, big kelp fronds waving at me. But I kept seeing this factory farm on the top of the hill, and I was like, do you know what? I know this is an egg-laying hen farm. And all the time that I campaigned for them, I'd never actually been into one. And I thought, I just have to go in. So I rode the next wave back to the beach, and got in my van, still in my wetsuit, and parked up at the top of the hill, and grabbed my camera from the bottom of the truck, and I just walked in. I had no idea what I was doing. I really didn't. And I just thought, I'll walk in and see what happens. And lo and behold, I got beyond the door. It was just the absence of a $10 padlock in the face of a $300,000 factory farm that they'd invested in. They forgot to put a $10 padlock on it. And I was able to get through and see the hens. And yeah, of course, that moment was quite a big moment for me. Seeing thousands of hens, like cash registers, springing their necks out from between the bars, just trying to get moments of freedom, just for a few seconds before it would spring back, and then another one would jostle into position. And I thought this was tough, but it was something that I thought I can go on and do. And I got caught, of course, and got a bit of a slap on the wrist, but nothing more than that. But it woke me up, and I saw the potential to do something with that footage, and I raced up to Auckland and put it in the hands of New Zealand's animal rights community, and they made use of it. They saw some value in it, and I think over that 20-year period, more and more people have seen the value in gathering this evidence and documentation and putting it into the hands of people like Animal Aid who can take it on, use it, and be effective with it and create change. And I think undercover investigations on certain issues are definitely speeding up the level of change that we're getting and the speed that we're getting, especially from like the corporate sector, the food sector, really heavily influenced and swayed by investigations focused on products that they stock or involved with. And, coming round now with big policies saying, we're not stocking eggs from battery cages, or, we're not going to have broiler chickens in our chains. So that kind of scale of change is probably happening a bit faster than the legislative side of things at the moment. It's people that are changing things, That's where all our great achievements are coming over the past few years. Legislation, I hope, will catch up with this because you do need it, because if you don't have it, what's to say when, we can go back to something that we thought was bad because there's nothing to stop us from doing it. Anyway, so 20 years on, I've decided to call it a day, and that makes me a little bit more able and comfortable to speak about it because it hasn't been something I've spoken a great deal about to people. Firstly, because trust, even your closest family and friends, you don't really want to share the type of projects you're doing or the assignments and places that you're visiting because you don't know, where that then might get dropped again. There could just be like a few friends, down the line that, could be working in a factory farm. So it's been very important to keep tight-lipped about it. Because there's a lot at stake, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I've worked in 30 countries for over 25 different animal organisations across the world, and just over 100 assignments. And I'll explain the type of assignments I've done and a little bit more about that coming up. What I've done tonight is I make sure I haven't got anything too graphic. I'm trying to tell more stories and anecdotes rather than, confront you with the worst imagery that we know is out there. So if I feel there is something slightly graphic, I think there may be one slide that might fall into that category. I'll let you know in advance, and please, shut your eyes and dream about your holiday or something. So moving on. So why are undercover investigations needed? Well, we've got to expose the truth. These are big factory farms, no windows, it's brick, block, it's fortresses, it's not places where people are expected to visit. And certainly owners and companies that are involved with them do their utmost to make sure that people don't visit. CCTV, movement detectors, high fences, all those kind of things are part and parcel with factory farms. They're like prisons, basically. Some actually even have watchtowers, with guards and watchtowers. I've come across that once before. But we have to expose the truth. And often we do these when we don't have any other choices. We find that governments are failing in terms of legislation and checking and enforcement. We find that this is one of the best ways that we can perhaps really challenge our adversaries and get them to speak out about the process that they're involved with. Because if we didn't do those, then it would be business as usual, and business as usual is not good for animals. So undercover investigations are a really valuable tool for organisations to get that evidence into the decision makers and people that can change things for the better for animals. And like I said, they can sometimes do it faster than scientific reports, and that's why I think they've been very effective. Also, it's credibility as well. As animal campaigners and activists, You know, we need to be credible with what we present in our campaigning, and we need to show that this story of animal suffering and animal abuse is not just one bad apple. It's, you know, generic. It runs across the system. It's routine. And therefore, a lot of the investigations, and particularly animal rights investigations, rely on getting a lot of evidence from a lot of places. And, you know, just to get evidence from, you know, 7, 8, 10 factory farms or slaughterhouses, the work that goes on to get that probably means looking at, you know, another 20 or 30 other sites that you may get into or close to, but don't. So there's so much more beyond the undercover investigation, I guess, that's shown to the public, and I think that's the depth of them. You know, we need that depth to give ourselves credibility. A lot of the projects I'm involved in are like multi-factory farm projects. You know, I've had to go to like 6, 7 countries and get evidence from like 60, 70 farms. And yeah, that takes time. So moving on, why did I turn to undercover investigations as a way of helping animals? Well, I touched on it a little bit. It was 1999, I just finished working on the campaign to end barren battery cages in the EU, and I've explained a little bit about what the trigger point was for me to decide to look at this. So after I got caught in that farm and then escaped that farmer and was able to give that evidence to a New Zealand organisation, I started working on a few fruit farms to try and save a few pennies so I could, you know, get myself some little cameras that I could maybe, you know, make more use of over the coming years. And I came back from New Zealand to the UK and decided, yeah, that was what I was going to do. And I think the first trip I did was following Irish livestock from Ireland down through to Spain. You know, horrendous journey in the middle of summer, faulty water systems on the trucks, you know, drivers not taking any breaks. You know, it was really bad. The highways of Europe for animal transport trucks back then. It still is, but it was really, really bad then. And I also spoke a little bit about, you know, how politicians were the trigger point for me. So one of the other things that I found was that actually wasn't a lot of people doing it. And, you know, there are so many factory farms and slaughterhouses across the globe. You know, even in 20 years of doing this, I've only barely scratched the surface. But there wasn't a lot of people doing it. You know, there really wasn't. And I think I can understand why there wasn't, because obviously you're going to have to be confronted with scenes that, you know, most regular people wouldn't want to be looking at. And a little tip, don't try any of this at home tonight or tomorrow. So there was a shortage, so I kind of fell into it really. It wasn't something that I wanted to do, but I knew it was important. And I didn't expect to do it for 20 years. I thought I'd, you know, do a few projects and hopefully that could be of use to the movement. But, you know, funnily enough, you know, I ended up doing it for a long time, and I found that I was able to, you know, cope doing this work. Up until probably the last couple of years when I did find it incredibly challenging. But I think we needed, you know, people prepared to do that in the movement. It's just one part, you know, of running a campaign. You know, we need our skilled advocates like Izzy, you know, who's able to take this material to the politicians. We need Sally's, you know, we need all those people in the organisations to, you know, put that film, that package, that investigation, to make it go out there and be most effective. And I think Animaid are really good at that, particularly with their CCTV campaign against slaughterhouses. So there was a few reasons why I did it, and the thing I can tell you is that I finished now, which I'm really, really pleased about. But I finished on a note of training some other activists to carry on with this work, and not just in the UK, but in Ukraine, in Kiev, in the Ukraine. You know, 10 years ago, I would have thought that was just an impossibility. But there's a lot of citizen journalists out there, you know, there's a lot of people today that are upset with the world, the injustices, and want to stand up for animals in some way. And citizen journalism, I think, falls into this category. You know, we can all do something. It doesn't have to be the investigator. It can be the fundraiser, the advocate, you know, the admin, the office manager, you know, the person on the streets, the collecting tins. You know, we can all help, and you all are helping. And that's what makes this movement so nicely gelled as it is right now. And that's why we're going to be successful.